Hi there, class. So this is going to be a short preview of this week's work on Reconstruction, and it also will serve as a great review for the Regents before the end of the year. So these are the Regents standards for Reconstruction, and today we'll look at the early efforts of Reconstruction as well as their circumstances, and then we'll continue on the next video with some of the intermediate steps. We'll really especially look at the early efforts of Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, and the Republicans, as well as some of the opposition to Reconstruction from the South. So just to review, the circumstances that bring Reconstruction about are the Civil War. The Civil War is triggered after years of sectionalism by Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860. The southern states who did not vote for Lincoln, many of them secede, and even more join the Confederate States after Fort Sumter in 1861, just a short time after Lincoln is inaugurated. The Civil War itself both divides and disrupts America in traumatic ways and has a very major impact on people all across the nation. To review, the Union is able to use their naval advantage to blockade the Confederate States, and also they're able to use their greater number of troops and their transportation network to divide and conquer the different parts of the Confederacy. The Confederacy is forced to surrender to the Union, and that really creates Reconstruction. So when Reconstruction starts, Abraham Lincoln is freshly reelected. He has his second inaugural address where he speaks about healing, how the country can come together. Of course, Lincoln is assassinated shortly after his reelection, and so he is not able to see through many of his plans for Reconstruction. This is why there are conflicting efforts by the Republican Party, Lincoln's party, to reunite the country. This is also a good time to add that the TCI textbook is a great resource for reviewing on your own. This would be Lesson 11, and specifically for the first 4 pages of that Lesson 11 from the textbook. It's a great way that you can have the textbook highlight main ideas itself. You can highlight and also take notes and hear it even played out loud. So some of the circumstances at the start of Reconstruction is that the Republican Party dominates Congress. This is a infographic of the makeup of the Senate at the start of Reconstruction. This is the Senate that will pass the 13th Amendment that will end slavery. As you can see, the Republicans themselves hold the 66% advantage in the Senate, able to pass any legislation they want, and especially with the Unionist and unconditional Unionist parties largely being controlled or influenced by the Republicans, they have more than enough votes to pass amendments. Many of the amendments are going to be able to pass through Congress because of this Republican super advantage. That is because the other circumstance of Reconstruction is that for the 13th Amendment, many of the Senate seats, many of the House of Representatives seats are vacant. The Confederate states that are in rebellion do not have representation in Congress. Therefore, the percentages needed to amend the Constitution are able to be acted on with only with not the entire country able to vote on it. And you notice that by the next Congress, the Congress that will pass the 14th Amendment along to ratification, there will be even fewer Unionists, there will be more Republicans, and there will still be many seats vacant. And this is how the Republican Congress becomes the radical Republican Congress, able to pass both legislation and proceed with passing amendments up to ratification without several members of the country being able to vote on it. So the amendments that the Republicans use this circumstances in order to send along to ratification. The first is the 13th Amendment. This, not the Emancipation Proclamation, is what outlaws slavery in the United States. Slavery can exist only as punishment for crimes when someone has been convicted, but otherwise it has been eliminated from the entire United States and its territories. The 14th Amendment, which we'll get to more in depth in our next video, will grant citizenship to all persons born and naturalized in the United States. This amendment is created to especially give citizenship to African American citizens. The Dred Scott Supreme Court case before the Civil War denied citizenship to African Americans all across the country, enslaved or free, and thus the Republican Congress and then the states will ratify this 14th Amendment, guaranteeing citizenship to both formerly enslaved and free African Americans, as well as any person born in the United States. This has a very long and lasting impact on the country, as many groups of people arrive in the United States and have different generations of children born in the United States. They will have citizenship. This also has the very important statute of forbidding states from denying basic rights to citizens, to not just citizens, but any person within its jurisdiction. This affects both immigrants and citizens of the United States. At least it's meant to. And finally, the 15th Amendment that will be passed during Reconstruction will be giving the right to vote, extending the right to vote, so that race or previous condition of servitude, aka slavery, cannot be a factor that limits voting rights in the United States. Citizens, no matter their color or if they had been enslaved previously, are allowed to vote. As we'll see, these major amendment efforts of Reconstruction are going to be combated by local measures and then state measures on the other side. So immediately after the 13th Amendment is passed, black codes are made and taken into effect in many states in the South. Some states even that had been in the Confederacy have these black codes that are passed to really make discriminatory laws to limit the freedom of African Americans and try to maintain them as a cheaper labor force. Since the South had depended on slavery and many of the former Confederate states still had both racist and economic incentives to maintain their dominance over African American populations, these black codes would be implemented to keep formerly enslaved and freed African Americans from expressing their different rights. Mississippi is the first to pass these black codes. For example, requiring African Americans to have a document for employment. If they are arrested, remember, you could still be forced to work if you have been arrested and convicted of crimes. Therefore, they're going to try to use these black codes to essentially, quote unquote, return the freed African Americans to as close a state of slavery as possible, end quote. So the black codes have a huge effect across the South to combat the amendments of Reconstruction, which are operating at a federal level. But if the black codes are being enforced on a state and local level, they are going to undermine those federal amendments. Of course, there's also the Ku Klux Klan and other Redeemer efforts across the South that are focused on maintaining the standards and maintaining the way of life that had existed before and during the Confederacy. These groups will use violence, intimidation, and any other dirty tactic they can, as well as trying to gain legitimate local, state, and eventually federal political power to spread their agenda. So as these oppositions to Reconstruction arise and gain power over Reconstruction, it creates a really negative impact on obviously the African American community and as well future immigrant communities throughout the country. So, of course, as the opposition on a local and state level, the Black Codes, the Ku Klux Klan form, the Republican government in Washington tries to pass laws and eventually the 14th Amendment to guarantee the rights that they have been hoping to extend throughout the United States. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is going to make a huge declaration that citizenship can be not a racial matter. This is really a predecessor to the 14th Amendment because not only is this Civil Rights Act vetoed by President Andrew Johnson, who takes over after Lincoln's assassination, but it leads the Republican Congress to believe that unless they pass the 14th Amendment, perhaps a future Congress will also overturn the Civil Rights Act. So the efforts of President Andrew Johnson are really also sometimes cast in light to both undermine Lincoln's efforts and the Republican Congress's efforts, and to extend racial inequities across the country. There are primary source documents that have Andrew Johnson stating such a racist agenda, but his power as president is greatly limited because, again, the Congress has such a large majority of united Republican voters that they can override Johnson's veto, and they do this several times. Not only this, but the Republican Congress, which gains this reputation as the radical Republican Congress, will also pass laws strictly to limit Andrew Johnson's power. When Andrew Johnson tries to violate or supersede those congressional actions, he is impeached. He's the first president to be impeached. And even though he is acquitted and not jailed, his power as president is effectively reduced both by the supermajority that the Republicans hold in Congress and his stained reputation following the impeachment. The major effort after the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is military reconstruction. This divides the southern states into 5 military districts. This takes away both state and local governing powers, and those states are instead overseen by a Union military general. This can also be considered a major effort of Reconstruction to take the power, the actual power in everyday communities and cities in the former Confederate states into the hands of the Republican Party, into the hands of the Union at large, and wrestle back the balance of power from the Black codes and Redeemer governments in the South. This will also be a major effort to pass the Civil Rights Amendment, because military reconstruction in the South will only be revoked once states in the Confederacy ratify and approve the 14th Amendment. So we'll continue here